The eruption of Mount St. Helens in May of 1980 changed the history of the Northwest and our understanding of volcanoes in an instant.
The eruption was not a surprise, but despite blast zone predictions, evacuations, and close monitoring, 57 people died.
Beneath the restless skies of Washington state, a silent force simmers. Its name is Mount St. Helens, a volcano that refuses to rest, its presence shaping the landscape, the ecosystem, and the collective memory of all who dwell in its broad shadow. On May 18, 1980, catastrophe was unleashed in an instant, an eruption so profound it redrew the contours of land, erased entire forests, and stole the lives of 57 people in a single, ash-darkened morning. Now, 45 years later, the world finds itself drawn back to those steep slopes, seeking answers. What has science uncovered in the decades since that fateful day? What secrets lie buried amid the scarred valleys? And what does the unyielding vigilance of this, the most active volcano in the lower 48, continue to reveal? As the Mount St. Helens Science and Learning Center reopens for a new season and researchers venture onto uncertain ground to place camera traps and record bird calls at more sites than ever before, questions only multiply. What is lost as federal funding teeters and programs hang in the balance? With every tremor, every wisp of steam, and every data set, Mount St. Helens forces us to confront the raw edge of Earth's power. Is the mountain finished with its story, or is its greatest chapter yet to be unearthed? A landscape reborn and rewritten. The awakening was sudden, yet its prelude stretched through millennia. In the spring of 1980, the ground swelled and bulged, magma urging upward beneath a peak long regarded with wary affection. Locals recall the pungent tang of ash, the distant rockfall, and the mounting sense that something was building. Rural families woke to news broadcasts of growing unrest, helicopters looping above the timberline, and columns of steam thick as clouds against the sky. The mountain, for decades, little more than a postcard backdrop to lumber towns and trout-filled creeks, was stirring. And then, with a roar heard for hundreds of miles, the north face of Mount St. Helens gave way. On that morning, the largest landslide in recorded history thundered downhill, followed instantly by a lateral blast that flattened 230 square miles of forest in moments. Blast pressures reached speeds of several hundred miles per hour at the heart of the devastation, striking with almost unimaginable force. For those in its direct path, the impact was both instant and total. The eruption was not simply an explosion, it was a transformation. Forests fell as if swept by an unseen hand. Entire stands of Douglas fir and western red cedar, homes to generations of owls and elk, were reduced to tangled shrapnel. Rivers clogged with mud and ash, choking life from their channels. Spirit Lake, once a serene alpine jewel, became a graveyard for entire trees, their skeletons drifting silently atop its waters. The blast zone stretched for miles, a stark testament to the ferocity of nature. Ash clouds, towering more than 15 miles into the sky, turned day to midnight across the inland northwest, disrupting air travel, infiltrating homes, and laying gritty deposits on farm fields hundreds of miles away. The effects echoed as far as the eastern seaboard, where trace amounts of ash fell days later. Yet within destruction, rebirth took root. Scientists, first arriving to assess the damage, soon realized they were witnessing an unprecedented natural experiment. What would become of a landscape scoured by fire and ash? Could life return? And if so, in what form? In the burned remains of forest, a web of renewal began. Lupine sprouted from the gray, anchoring nitrogen for generations to come. Pocket gophers unearthed seeds, mixing the volcanic ash with fragments of the old world and creating islands of possibility. From beneath logs, the first insects ventured forth, tentative but persistent. The lakes themselves, clouded and lifeless, began slowly to shimmer with new forms: bacteria, plankton, then fish. Fungi soon colonized burnt stumps, knitting underground webs that funneled nutrients to newly sprouting plants. Year after year, scientists fanned out to track these pulses of resilience. They marked new bird nests, noted the first deer tracks, and cataloged the succession of plants clawing back from oblivion. The chaos of the eruption created conditions for groundbreaking discovery, inviting questions that never would have arisen in the steady rhythm of an untouched forest. Visitors to the blast zone now witness a landscape in metamorphosis. Once sterile views, barren for miles, are now softened by alder stands and the shifting gold of prairie grasses. The meadows hum with pollinators, and in hollows left by mud flows, amphibians lay eggs. The work of recovery, both silent and spectacular, moves forward on 1,000 fronts at once. So, Mount St. Helens became not merely a site of tragedy, but a living laboratory. Was the mountain story an exception or a rule? Could life truly rise again and again from the ash, or are there limits to renewal? Lessons etched in ash and bone. To a geologist, Mount St. Helens is not simply a hazard, but a library of rock, sediment, and the rhythms of eruption. Each layer, pressed and cooled, records a page in Earth's story. Since the 1980 blast, teams of researchers, federal scientists, academics, and volunteers have combed the volcano's slopes and valleys, deciphering an archive written in tephra and mud. One lesson is sobering and clear. The mountain is far from dormant. The USGS, monitoring Mount St. Helens as the most active volcano in the lower 48, has revealed a consistent pattern of unrest. Since 1980, the mountain has cycled through eruptive phases, including rebuilding a lava dome inside its crater. From 2004 to 2008, another dome grew, accompanied by small eruptions and thousands of earthquakes. Even now, minor eruptions, persistent rumbles, and intermittent plumes confirm that although the immediate devastation has passed, the threat remains. But the discoveries have not been limited to warnings. By monitoring the composition of volcanic gases or analyzing the minerals in new domes, scientists have mapped magma flows deep beneath the mountain shell. These signatures, combined with satellite imagery and seismic arrays, provide an early warning system. Primitive, perhaps, but a vital improvement over ignorance. Layers of ash visible across the pumice plains are more than geological curiosities. Each tells a story, a 1480 blast that reshaped the landscape, and still earlier eruptions witnessed only by the region's earliest peoples. Mud flows, known as lahars, preserved in the rock record worn of times when downstream communities were threatened, influencing today's safety plans and evacuation routes. Engineers and planners now consult these chronicles when building bridges and preparing communities for future events. These lessons, distilled from centuries of vigilance and sudden catastrophe, inform emergency protocols throughout the region. Yet geology alone cannot answer all the questions sparked by St. Helens' rebirth. As the forests return, as lakes settle, as animals recover, scientists and policymakers are compelled to ask, how does a devastated landscape truly evolve? Does the memory of fire remain in the fabric of the new ecosystem, or does it fade as new life takes hold? The resilience of life and its limits. If the volcano remade the land, biology reimagined it. In the first days after the eruption, Mount St. Helens seemed stripped of all complexity. Only gray silt, splintered stumps, and silence. Yet this emptiness was deceptive. Gradually, the land quickened with pioneers. Gophers, disturbed from their burrows but alive, gnawed passageways through the hardening ash, cultivating the foundations for plant succession. Each tunnel loosened the soil and provided shelter where seeds could sprout, forming microhabitats that offered fresh opportunities for plants and animals. Lupine and fireweed colored the slopes, fixing nitrogen and drawing nutrients from the desolation. Their roots stabilized shifting ground, and their flowers provided sustenance for the first bees and butterflies to return. In the absence of a forest canopy, beetle populations soared, feeding on dead wood and speeding decomposition. These beetles, in turn, attracted birds, soon to be monitored more closely than ever before. Surprisingly, Some animals returned before shrubs took root. Elk, displaced by the explosion, soon lingered at the edges and returned, feeding on new growth along the muddy slopes. Their hooves churned the ash, mixing in organic material and carrying seeds to barren places. Salamanders, isolated on patches of surviving terrain called refugia, found their way back to wetlands. Prairie pocket mice scurried across fallen logs, adapting to the transformed world. By 2025, research efforts had intensified. At 50 new bird survey sites, a total of 117 camera traps watch continuously, collecting data that builds a tapestry of renewal. Students and ornithologists review recordings each spring, charting the return of robins, the haunting call of the hermit thrush, and the reappearance of raptors. The fate of these birds serves as a barometer of ecological health, their fortunes now interwoven with the mountain itself. Yet, as dynamic as this recovery may seem, it is not uniform. Some species remain missing. Spotted owls, once more common here, are rarely seen. Their preferred old-growth forests have been replaced with dense alder and willow stands, not the towering trees they once favored. True old-growth forest may take centuries more to re-establish, if it ever does. Meanwhile, lakes sterilized in hours by boiling debris now support life in new forms, altered forever. Some aquatic insects, introduced for research or by accident, have shaped food webs in unforeseen ways. There are limits to resilience, thresholds beyond which memory cannot restore what was lost. These dynamics have changed the management of protected lands elsewhere. Lessons from Mount St. Helens challenge the view that natural disturbance is purely destructive. Controlled burns, rewilding, and succession now inform debates and policy across North America. Still, the question lingers: has life truly rebounded or become something new? Is recovery possible, or is this something stranger? A form of ecological amnesia, where old memories are covered but never quite erased? Surveillance, technology, and the edge of uncertainty. To guard against disaster, one must first learn how to watch for its approach. At Mount St. Helens, this mandate has evolved from simple observation to a sophisticated technological ballet. The peak and valleys bristle with cameras, sensors, and seismographs, all tuned to the faintest hint of change. Real-time GPS stations monitor minute shifts in the mountain's surface, mapping movements that can signal rising magma. Infrared satellites detect invisible heat signatures. Drones map new cracks in the crater, giving scientists detailed 3D models. Infrasound microphones record the mountain's deep, unheard groans, signals loaded with warning. The urgency behind such vigilance is unmistakable. As the most active volcano in the lower 48, every shudder and rumble draws attention. When steam plumes spiral skyward, or the earth shifts by only centimeters, alarms sound, locally and beyond. Earthquake swarms, sometimes numbering in the hundreds per day, prompt responses from emergency centers stretching as far as Portland. Yet despite advances in monitoring, uncertainty remains. The volcano's mood can shift in a heartbeat, and the lesson of 1980, of sudden, catastrophic release after weeks of ambiguity, hovers over each decision. Sensor placement, the cadence of aerial surveys, and the tuning of gas sampling rigs all rely on best guesses, calculated on incomplete information and the Earth's own unpredictability. Decision makers must balance the risks of premature closures and warnings against the cost of complacency. In 2025, researchers face a crossroads as federal cuts threaten the programs that monitor, educate, and protect. The risk grows not just of scientific ignorance, but of practical disaster. How can streams be managed for sudden lahars if the warnings are missed? Who will interpret the rhythms of the earth if funding dries up and sensors go dark? Educators, too, depend on this work, using fresh discoveries to spark the curiosity of future geologists and biologists. Here, the limits of preparation are exposed. Despite decades of progress, Mount St. Helens reminds us that nature's unpredictability cannot be fully tamed. Will our vigilance be enough when the mountain next stirs? Memory, loss, and stewardship. As the 45th anniversary of the eruption passes, memory sharpens. Locals still recall the visit of a Washington geologist the day before it all changed. A final survey amid murmurs of steam and swelling ground. Each May, survivors and the families of the lost gather on the ridges, honoring those who perished and the volcanologist David Johnston, who radioed his last warning. Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it, moments before the blast. This annual remembrance draws together survivors, families, new residents, and school children, seeking meaning in tragedy and revelation in recovery. Some bring old photographs or jars of ash. Others bring questions, hoping the story of loss can lead to greater care and preparation for the future. For educators and stewards, the work is both communal and scientific. The Mount St. Helens Science and Learning Center at Coldwater, newly opened for the season, stands as both museum and classroom. Its walls echo with stories of recovery and responsibility. Visitors confront the devastation, but also the miracle of rebirth. Interactive displays show before and after images. Children simulate eruptions and trace the changes in real time. Trails across the landscape offer lessons in numerous languages, tying memory to place. But even as the memory of tragedy is fixed in the land, federal support falters. Programs critical to public safety, research, and interpretation hang in the balance. Volunteers and nonprofits step in to fill the gap, but face overwhelming need. In an era defined by wildfires, rising seas, and species decline, some ask whether deep investment in one volcano remains worthwhile, or if, in fact, now is the time to double down and draw every lesson possible from the ongoing experiment that is Mount St. Helens. Beneath these decisions lies a single certainty. Stewardship is not a luxury. It is an act of survival. When the mountain next awakens, it will not pause for budgets to be passed or sensors to be serviced. We are not only witnesses to its power, but also participants in the legacy it leaves. From volcano to laboratory, from tragedy to transformation. Perhaps Mount St. Helens' greatest lesson is not written in ash-streaked logs or measured in the swing of a needle, but in the adaptability of people, scientists, teachers, local residents, who have learned and innovated amid uncertainty. Each new data point is a brushstroke in a picture still forming. The expansion of camera traps and bird survey sites in 2025 is more than a bureaucratic milestone. It is a response to the mysteries that remain. Why do some species flourish while others vanish? How do soil, light, ash, and chance interact to determine the future? Are the processes at play here unique to this volcano, or do they echo across landscapes transformed by fire or flood? Scientific methods, satellite imaging, field notes, indigenous oral history merge at Mount St. Helens, creating a nexus where disciplines blend. Local tribes, whose histories contain accounts of fire and darkness on the mountain, now work with researchers to guide recovery and reinterpret old records. In doing so, a new science emerges, one honoring both complexity and context. The mountain does not reveal all its secrets at once. Each discovery deepens the mystery, inviting new questions. Can the pattern of destruction and rebirth here offer lessons for communities recovering from hurricanes, wildfires, or floods in a changing climate? For the public, these lessons ripple in unexpected directions. School children learn not just geology, but resilience and change. Artists and writers draw inspiration from a landscape that mirrors inner transformation. Painters try to capture the colors that followed the blast. Poets explore the silence of each new spring. Pilgrims, local and far-flung, pause at the crater, feet planted on ground made new by destruction. Each brings new questions and hopes. Mount St. Helens holds a paradox. From a morning of devastating violence in 1980 arose decades of creativity, innovation, and connection. The blast, in tearing certainty away, opened the door for scientific inquiry and public engagement. Perhaps in the end, the most powerful force unleashed was not the destruction, but the possibility of renewal. What remains unseen. Even as memories sharpen and research expands, Mount St. Helens remains, at its core, unknowable. The crater, shorn of its peak, broods in silence, surrounded by new forests and the subtle scars of old mudflows. At sunset, the mountain's silhouette glows red. At night, It seems to hum with the echoes of history. Scientists come and go, boots dusted with volcanic grit and packs filled with equipment, yet the essential mystery endures. Each year brings more data, collected, cataloged, compared. The expansion of monitoring in 2025, with new camera traps and biological surveys, is more than technical progress. It is a response to the awareness that unseen patterns may be as critical as observed ones. The mountain's surface tells one story, but tremors deep below hint at others. What hidden patterns are emerging in the interplay of geology, biology, and time? Every funding debate, every threatened program carries risks, not only for security and education, but for our ability to anticipate and adapt. Mount St. Helens has shown again and again that the margin between disaster and discovery is dangerously slim. Will we heed the lessons written in its valleys, or forget them? As the sun sets over green slopes and another anniversary quietly slips by, one thing remains certain: the story of Mount St. Helens is not finished. It expands with every tremor, every bird call, every fresh question and hidden mystery. What, in the end, will the mountain teach us next? If you found this exploration of the ongoing discoveries and mysteries of Mount St. Helens compelling, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the frontier of science. What questions do you have about the volcano's future? What secrets do you think lie beneath its surface? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining us on this journey of destruction and rebirth. Until next time, stay curious,